Okay, so welcome again, everybody. Just as a reminder, my name's Alistair Gittner and I'm the research lead here at Sheffield Associate Research School. And we're in the middle of this programme about making the difference for disadvantaged students. And as you can see from this diagram, we're up to module 4, where we're beginning to explore in more detail the tiered approach of the pupil premium document that you will have prepared some time ago. And we are going to be unpicking that a little bit more and looking at various aspects of it. And we'll be moving on in that from then to module 5, which is a self-study module. And you will see that the next module, because of Easter holidays and things, is not until after the Easter holidays towards the end of April. So we've got today's session, because John isn't here, will be slightly shorter in some respects, in that those parts of the presentation that John would have led on, and though I have experience of the slides and things that he will be using or would have been using, I dare say that I might go through them slightly quicker than he would have done. But also some of the admin tasks might take that a little bit longer, but we still envisage finishing by 5 o'clock and probably slightly ahead of that. There are one or two other announcements about things that will be happening towards the end. And so if that would be there, we know that.
Yes, I do. Zoe needs to talk to her.
Could I just remind people
yeah, my Happy Minds project.
Let me just,
I think all she wants to do is rearrange.
Okay, sorry about that. Just a reminder, say if you can stay on mute, that would be really helpful. We are working our way through this implementation guidance diagram, and so this is the whole implementation process, this implementation cycle that we're working through. And you can see that the modules are listed on here. 8 and 9 are kind of merged together in our program, and those are the ones to do with visits and follow-on support afterwards. But you can see that in module 4 we're still firmly embedded in the explore phase of implementation. We're still trying to work out and think about where we are currently and those issues that are the most important in our schools, whether they are the symptoms or whether they're the causes of the issues. And those are the things that we've been looking at. And in today's session, we're going to be looking at school culture and a look at a particular case study. We're going to be, and we think a little bit about the data and the microdata that you've got, though perhaps not quite so much on that, but we'll be doing more time on comparing the different tiered approaches and then setting you up for the self-study part, which is module 5. If you've been on one of our training sessions in real life, you will know that one of the great benefits of them is that there is plenty of time for you to share with each other and share with other colleagues at a similar level, your peers, and also time for you to do some work and to do some note making or reflection and some personal preparation, so that when you leave the meeting, it's not as if you've got lots and lots of tasks to do. Some of those tasks and some of the thinking and the space is created in the actual session. Now, that's not quite so easy online, but in this session, more than others that we've had, there is going to be time for you to talk and also brief time for you to reflect and to start thinking about what you need to do next. And so I'm sure you have already, but it might be worthwhile having your pen and paper, and if you can, put the sign on the door to say no distractions, turn your phone off. It will help, particularly when you're in the breakout rooms. So it would just help me if, just for a moment, if you could all put your name and school into the chat. It just helps us with keeping track of who's been able to attend and who might need information being sending out to them. So if you could just do that for me in the next minute, and then we'll move on with the rest of the session. Thank you for those people that have been super prompt. Okay. So the first place that we want to start off is this idea of this, that we want to think about school culture. And you will all, I'm sure, have thoughts and views on your own school culture. Here's a quote from the Social Mobility Commission. And there's lots spoken about culture in schools. Indeed, there are some fairly high-profile head teachers who've written whole books on the subject of culture in their schools. And there's lots of evidence to demonstrate how hugely important culture can be. And school culture can, in some places, be more important than the structures and the organisation within a school. And it can make up, in fact, for deficits in structures and systems, and can make a huge impact. And a school, your schools, you may well have really good culture within your schools, and that can be making a real difference to closing the attainment gap between students who are disadvantaged and their non-disadvantaged peers. So I'm just going to pose a question, and then you might want to just have a think about this, in terms of what role can school culture play in addressing the attainment gap. I don't need your responses in the chat at this stage. Just be thinking about what can school culture do, or what role can it have? And school culture is one of those things that isn't accidental. It needs to be worked on, and it needs to be developed, and it also needs to be nurtured. And it's something that when you get new members of staff, it might be something that you have to verbalize and explain. You might have to offer training and bring people into your culture that you are trying to put together in school. And again, this is all personal reflection time at the moment, because we're going to have a chance to chat later on. But here's some words that might reflect an ideal culture in your school. And so you might have some here, if you just spend a few minutes looking through these, thinking, well, which ones would I say are part of our culture? If you were going to rag rate them, which ones are the green ones? Which ones where you think, well, maybe that's not so strong in our school? And which are the ones where you might have to think, well, we don't do that very well, or we don't do that very well, but perhaps we should. And of course, if you've had a chance to do the gap task, the case study or the pupil premium work that you've done already may have already highlighted some of these for you. So some of these are about how adults talk to children. And they're also about how all adults in the school might talk to children. They're also about, one of them speaks specifically about a shared vision and a shared culture. And that's something else that we're going to look at if you were going to go across your staff. Do all your staff share your vision or share the culture? So culture is seen in everyday actions, but is also about beliefs. How we respond to students. We're doing a big piece of work here at Notre Dame about narrating the positive, explaining to children about trying to catch them when they're good, trying to demonstrate why they're doing, so that thank you to those students who are sat facing the front. Thank you to those of you that have brought the equipment. That very positive culture is something that we're trying to work very hard on at the moment to develop strong relationships. And we might see all of these things here. And then the second one is about how high expectations and safe to make mistakes. One of the things we're going to be looking at in the implementation guidance process that we've started off, that diagram at the start, one of the sessions to do with implementation accepts that sometimes teachers get it wrong. And so sometimes we will make mistakes in our actions, and having a system that can allow for teacher mistakes as much as student mistakes is quite important. And then the third one is about aspirations and keeping students on track, specific actions, the destinations as a limiting factor, and this cap on learning. And when we're talking about aspirations, there's evidence that suggests that that from the Millennium Cohort study, that when children are very small, 2 or 3 years old, about 95% of parents are hopeful that their children will go to university. But by the time children are 14, this has dropped to only about 50%. And so something has happened in those interim years. And why is this lack of aspiration, or where does this come from? And often it's not so much a lack of aspiration, it's a lack of seeing how to actually embed their aspiration, how to actually access and act on their aspirations. And so at university, thinking about at university level, if you're from a family that have never seen anybody go to university, you don't know how it works, you don't know what it's like to go away from home and study. When things get difficult, you don't have the role models to say, well, it's going to get better after a few weeks, you won't feel quite so homesick perhaps. And it's those things there, that the aspirations and being able to work through that is something that's quite important. But I appreciate that many of you on here are primary school teachers, and so why are we talking about going to university for primary age children? Well, there's increasing evidence that children are starting to formulate their position in society at a really young age. And though they may not make career choices at primary school, they may rule out certain careers. My own particular subject is science, and we know that within STEM subjects, some children will rule out a career in STEM by the age of about 7 or 8. And so that they'll see it as not being for the likes of them or for the likes of their family. And so they might be interested still in science, they may enjoy science at school, but they're not seeing it as a career aspiration. And so we know that aspirations are very important things to look at primary school, but I know that I'll be speaking to the converted on that one. Let's move on to the next slide. So thinking about culture in schools, when people talk about this, one of the things, like many of these topics, we use an iceberg analogy, because the aspects of the culture that we actually might see in the school are only a very small part of the whole thing, which is the culture within the school. The observable culture is only a small part of the total. And so as you go around school, you'll have your what we might call the artifacts of a culture. So these could be the posters on the wall, those people who we celebrate, the work that's on the board, the past heroes that have been to the school, or people that we are looking at in our assemblies or things like this. We might also see how the adults are talking to children and how we are talking to each other. And those are things that we might see as we're going around the school. And then we might look a little bit under the surface and start thinking about values and beliefs, because it could well be that colleagues will be complying with whatever behaviour policy we have in school, but they may not necessarily believe that it is the actual way forward. And I've had experience of that myself as a senior leader, that people do it, but when you challenge them, they're not wholehearted about it because they don't believe that the policy will actually work or make a difference. They're just paying lip service to it, if you like. And thinking again about underlying assumptions, how do children talked about, how are parents talked about by your staff when they're in the staff room and they're on those off guard moments? what are the sort of language that they're using for students. Over the years, I've tried to become very particular, for instance, about the difference between low ability students and low prior ability students. There's a lot more positive mindset about lower prior ability rather than low ability students. Low ability has the danger of being self-fulfilling. Low prior ability is tied up in that is, you know, you haven't done very well perhaps in the past, but we've got every chance that we're going to move you on now in the future. And so one of the things we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at a case study. And this is available again from the Padlets. If I put the link back into the Padlet. And this is an explanation of the culture from the Dixon's Academy Trust. And there's a lot that has been said about Dixon's Academy Trust. This is one of those kind of high profile trusts. It has certain characteristics which make it famous or infamous. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to give you opportunity to read that. And then we'll perhaps have a few opportunities to through the chat, or you might want to unmic and talk to us, and we'll think about what your reflections can be about that. So you'll need to go to the Padlet and find the case study, and it's called something like Dixon's Academy case study. If you have difficulty, just either unmic or put it into the chat, and I'll try and help. It's now sort of 22 minutes past. So if I give you till 3:30 to enable you to have a chance to read that case study. Any problems, put it into the chat. Hi, Jay Elstone. Are you able to access it?
Yeah. Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, sure, yeah.
Right, so this is the first session that I've been able to join in with.
Right, okay. Yeah.
So I'm not sure how to access this document.
So have you seen if you click on the link in the chat, have you
Oh, is that it? Yeah. Padlet. Right.
Padlet, then you'll see that there's module 4.
Module 4. Brilliant.
And then if you scroll down that module 4, it's the second document says Dixon's Academy Culture Case. It says story. I will edit it so that it says story.
All right. What do I do? Just click on module 4.
Just click on that, and it should open up as a PDF, and it'll probably open up in your browser.
All right. It's.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
okay.
this is it.
Yeah.
Right, thank you.
No problems. So just a couple more minutes. If you finish early and want to add first thoughts or reflections into the chat, or in a couple of minutes, if you'd rather wait and unmic and then speak to us, that would be great. Okay. Would anybody like to share some thoughts? There are two questions on the slide. So what values are evidenced through this narrative? And then how is culture intentional at every decision point?
Yeah, I don't mind sharing.
Thank you.
We're reading the case study. I think the 30-minute sanction for getting your equipment. If you're a pupil premium child, you've got you might have 1,000,001 different things. Even not a pupil premium child, you might be a young carer. You might have got 1,000,001 different things happening. That means you miss that morning meeting where that equipment could be handed out. I just feel it was a little bit draconian. I don't know if you've read the poem "If I Ain't Got a Pencil," but it reminded that kind of really kind of encapsulates what that a child has to go through in the morning. So I just felt that those high expectations, although very key for certain people, premium children, that's just not really going to be. There's going to be more barriers than just that, really.
That's the classic, the infamous nature of this policy, isn't it? It's one that's fairly high profile, and you see it referred to in the press. But thank you for sharing that. I'll come back in a minute to that, Ian. If you found the chat, then Sarah and Mandy have put in that there's high expectations, the collaborative approach, community, family, clarity of communication, no limits, motivation. You bring out this idea of over-rationalise, and I'll come back to that myself in a minute. Fostering independence, knowing pupils as individuals, high expectations, treating pupils as individuals, collaborative approach, and this Rachel's put this very clear that success is wholeheartedly facilitated. And I think the one piece of information which I think is actually missing from this case study that I've seen in another report about Dixon's is that they didn't decide one school holiday to bring in this sort of on the same day detention and that kind of this strategy. They talk about how this strategy was developed over 5 years. They worked with their families, they worked with their students, they worked with all their stakeholders to come to this in over 5 years. And so I think that the question that I'm sorry, I don't know your first name, it's just down as J Elstone raises, what is the flexibility in this? What happens in there? What they say is that there is all this scaffolding that's put in place. So yes, a student for a pupil premium may end up in detention one day, but in that process, it'll be, here's a pen, here's a pencil, you know, you can bring this tomorrow and then hopefully they won't be in detention the next day. And there is that scaffolding and there is that structure in place to have those conversations so that it is seen as supportive, but that however everybody has these same high expectations. Somebody pointed out about this rationalizing. We over rationalize so that pupils always know why. And this is something that we're thinking about at Notre Dame. You know, will you face the front so that you can see the screen and see what I'm talking about? Is the, you know, something to think about, and explaining at every stage why you're doing things, even to relatively young students or young children, can have that effect. Somebody else mentioned as well about communication, this communication with parents. Parents know what the expectations are, that they're going to need this equipment even before the children come to school. They know that that's going to be part of the expectation. And it mentions families know what to expect on several occasions as you're going through that. And then one that we know that I thought was very interesting, I don't know whether anybody else picked it up. This has been practiced over and over again in role play. That word that strikes fear into teachers in terms of CPDs, and we're going to role play it. But it's very clear that it's part of their culture, that they are going to help staff and to practice these things. Would anybody like to add anything else before we move on that? Thank you to those people who've put things in the chat. So I'm just going to check through. Yeah, clear that success is wholeheartedly facilitated. Children taking ownership. Yes, there's that very clear metacognition type, self-regulation type strategy in there. I'll go on. I'll come back to that in a few minutes. And high expectations. Yes, and there is that. They're given that chance, aren't they? Again, I don't know your first name, L. Routledge. You know, they're given the chance so that they do get it right the first time. Yeah, independence and personal responsibility. So this is kind of summarizes some of their culture that's from the Dixon's academies. I'll just let you read through that. There is this relentless word that's in there, isn't it? Relentless about student learning, the relentless to students about their own learning. And one thing that the Dixon's Academy Trust have done is that they have this thing that they call open source, and these slides were made available to you, and you can go and have a look at this. And it demonstrates how they do the morning meetings where they're talking about checking this equipment. It talks about why they think it's important. And if you click on the second link, it takes you through to their YouTube page where you can see that's on the board, and it goes through some of the things there that they think is important. And, you know, right back at the beginning when I started talking about culture needs to be nurtured, it needs to be thought about and practiced, and it's not just something that staff and colleagues sort of absorb by accident. Here in Dixon's, they're very overt and very clear about it. And as I said, you know, that there are opportunities here for staff to see how it's done. So if you're a new member of staff, you can see how the culture is demonstrated. But also, I guess, if you are looking for jobs, it can you can make your mind up about whether you feel that school is right for you. And so they're quite open about it in terms of, you know, defining their culture, and it may not be for everybody. Okay. So in a minute, I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. And what I would like you to do is to start thinking about the case study and the data work that you did on the over in the gap task. And bear with me 1 second. And so I'll put you into breakout rooms, and what we're going to ask you to do is you'll have about 15 minutes to talk about the case study, and there are some questions that you are going to be asked to think about. I'm just going to stop the share for the moment, and I'm going to go to something that's called a Jamboard. Now, I don't know whether people have used these before. I'm going to demonstrate how you can use those. So, okay, hopefully you've seen some coloured boxes. Can somebody say yes in the chat or something so that you can, I know that you can see that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine, great. So I will put you into a number of breakout rooms with about 4 or 5 people in each group. And after you've had, you may want to just do introductions, but then I would like you to talk about the gap task that you did. And so one of them is about collecting the data, and then what if the case study has highlighted anything in particular for you, and whether it's highlighted certain groups of students that you might want to focus on, so that the one example you chose might have highlighted there are peers that are similar, and then you might have data gaps that you'd like to fill and any comments. So if you've not used a Jamboard before, you can see it on the top, it says 1 of 10. If you click on there, you'll see that you'll come to breakout rooms 2 and 3 and 4. I think we're going to be in about 4 or 5 breakout rooms. So when it goes into the breakout rooms, remember your number, and then you will find your particular board. And then if you want to, what I'd like you to do as you're going along, maybe somebody can collate some general thinking. So put together another post-it note, and you click on the single on the side, and then that gives you time to type something, and then you save it, and you can see that it adds it to there, and then you can drag it around and decide, well, it's better under that one or better under that one. Okay, and so you've got about 15 minutes to do that. I might drop in and out of them to see how you're getting on. We talk about Chatham House rules in all of this, that please by all means be open, and I hope that you feel able to be open and share about your school, but please can we try to to respect the confidentiality of that. I will pause the recording while you're in the breakout rooms, and you can't come back to the slides or anything, so that if you communicate through the chat, I'll be able to pick that up. So just bear with me, because this is the bit that is a bit slower, because I'm doing these things on my own. Okay. So there's going to be 5 breakout rooms, and that will mean that there are 4 or 5 people in each one. And it's now 22, so I'll give you about 15 minutes, and then there'll be another little activity, and then we'll go into a break if you are thinking about how the rest of the session is going to pan out. So M.A. Bradbury, later Michael, are you okay? just wait while the other groups come back. They're obviously deep in conversation, which is good. Okay, I think most people are back in the room. We have restarted recording, so that if you would not wanted to share your video, then please feel free to turn it off. We'll just spend a couple of minutes going through everything, and you can see you have the opportunity here. If you click on the button at the top, you can scroll through and see the comments that are being made. So that is there somebody from room breakout 1 who wants to just highlight one or two things that you were talking about? There was quite a good conversation going on when I dropped in a few moments ago.
I'll speak because it's my random notes that I kind of made as we were talking.
Thanks,
I mean, I think the big focus for us, we did talk about COVID, unfortunately, and talked about actually the really significant impact of for EYFS and Key Stage 1. So the gap feels like it's widening down there. And we talked about the challenges of sometimes you can get into intervention overload. You know, you have that many interventions running that actually children at risk of missing, you know, high quality wave 1 teaching and access to a broad and balanced curriculum. And then we ended on a positive because Leighton shared that they've successfully recruited an academic mentor this year that's having a positive impact. So yes, so we tried to end on a positive.
The early year one, I think.
Thanks, Kate.
I think the early years one is quite important, isn't it? Really, a colleague was talking about how her and her friend had taken their little ones away together on holiday, and when they'd brought them come back home again, they'd gone as a couple, and their husbands had been working, so hadn't been able to join them, and their husband had noticed that the big difference in the social skills of their 2-year-old or 3-year-old just in that 1 week of going on holiday with other children, the big step forwards that they'd made, because that was the first time that they'd actually been able to do anything any of that sort. And so for early years, it has been really critical. Leighton, do you want to join in?
Yeah, I think we were just we're referring to that, and we talked about speech and language being the barrier than academic achievements, because obviously you've got significant cohorts of these children who think reception year 1, year 2, they still haven't had a full academic year. They don't know what a full academic year looks like, to be fair. They've missed out on all of those parties, those social play, those play groups. And I know we have currently our reception class, there's nearly 40% of them accessing speech and language. So is it an academic barrier, or actually is the speech and language the barrier? Which one do you get right first? Chicken and egg situation.
Right, yeah.
A child into 5 intervention groups for phonics, for catch up, for keep up, and then the daily phonics, or 2 sessions a week on speech and language. But if you've identified the speech and language as the barrier, surely the speech and language should take 5 interventions a week, and then only 2 phonics interventions. Trying to get that balance right is what we were talking about. Yeah,
and I think there are no right or wrong answers, and the right answer might be different for every child, mightn't it? And so that it's not an easy one. But thank you for sharing that. If we go to group 2, is there somebody from room 2 that would like to just pick out a couple of highlights from their conversations?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time talking about the data, and that some people have switched over from STIMS into ARBA, so they found challenging the persistent disadvantaged, and the highlighting and, you know, looking at the historical data around them. We also discussed as well from the case studies, it highlighted some lines of inquiry that require further investigations back in school, and we talked a lot around the white British boys, and that from the data, from looking at the data, it's really highlighted some, maybe the lack of aspirations, especially around literacy as well. And is that to do with parental support as well? So that's where our focus of conversation mainly was around.
And aspiration is one of those really difficult things to investigate. I know that the evidence is such that the success of those is very varied, and there's no clear link as to which comes first. Academic success leads to higher aspiration, or whether a higher aspiration leads to academic success, and it's a difficult one to tease out. But great, thank you for sharing those. I'm just going to stop that share and go back onto my PowerPoint. Okay. So what we're going to do is, we've been working for about an hour, and so I'm going to give us a chance for a comfort break and a chance to refill a cup of tea if that's what you need. Again, in the Padlet, there are 2 case studies, and one of them is aimed at primary school, and one is aimed at the Ashgrove. One is aimed at a primary case study. Sorry, sample strategies, my mistake. These are sample strategies similar to the ones that you will have been doing as part of the GAP task. And there's one that's aimed at primary, which is at Ashgrove Academy, and there's one that is a secondary school, and that might be of interest to some of you, or you may just want to have a look at the Ashgrove. So it's the same again. What I'm going to do is that will be available from the Padlet for you to download, and you might have your own one in front of you if you want to compare it. And then we're going to sort of like have a break now for about 10 or 15 minutes, and that will give you opportunity to read through those sample strategies, and then also to have a comfort break. And so I make it now about 2 minutes past 4. So if we aim to restart at about 4:15, and then there'll be about another half an hour or so of this meeting, and I shall aim to finish at about 10 to 5. Okay, so again, if anyone's struggling to find it in the Padlet, then let me know, and we might be able to find another way of getting it to you. And then I'll see you back here in about 12 minutes. So welcome back, and I hope you had a chance to have a break, and I had the chance to pick up one of these tiered model strategy summaries and had a read through of it, and are starting to think about what your document might look like and how the two compare. One of the things that when we're planning these sessions, John and I are very aware of is that you have created your pupil premium policy in this tiered approach already. And what's really important is that I think we remember that this is one of the first or certainly one of the few examples that I've seen of really joined up thinking from the DFE, in that we had this research evidence that suggested the tiered approach that the research schools were promoting, and the DFE saw that it was a good idea, and then have asked for the sort of statutory policy to be written in this same sort of way. But having been responsible for this in a previous existence, you sort of tended to have this quick dash round in terms of creating your pupil premium policy, put it up on the website, and then breathe a huge sigh of relief. And you and the head teacher, or if you are the head teacher, the deputy head, and the chair of governors were grateful that it was there, but it just became a document online. what we want and hope is that this new approach can become a real living document that is changing, that is adapting, that you crossing things out and putting new things in, and each year you might be looking at it and deciding to evolve it yet further. So in a minute, I'm going to give you opportunity to talk about this with your the people in the same breakout room again. Just to say that I've put into the chat a link through to another EEF document that gives examples of 6 more tiered strategies. The first 4 are kind of are more as to where we are now. The last 2 were more about how people came out of lockdown and when they came back to school, so they perhaps are not quite so relevant as they are now. But there are a number of different schools there that will have something, hopefully, that will maybe chime with what you're doing or give you ideas or things to think about. It's not that it's a secret in any way, but John and I felt that we ought to be open and share what we're doing here at Notre Dame. And I appreciate that for many of you here, this is a secondary context, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But this is available on our website. You can go and see it. What we did here at Notre Dame is that we made our recovery plan and our pupil premium plan and the school development plan are all kind of now evolved into one document, so that we had our recovery plan helping students come back after lockdown, and then we developed that into our pupil premium strategy. This was all done in that tiered approach, and then this is really the development plan that we are working through. And when students came back to school, we started reviewing last year and then coming up with this year for 21-22, there were a number of challenges that we identified that we felt that we needed to focus on. And I will just have to get my notes for this section, because this is one of the bits that John was going to do, and he lives and breathes this policy document in a much more in-depth way than I do. And so we identified a number of challenges, and I'm just going to pick out 4 of those. Number 1 was that there was still a need, even though we've been back in school for a while, we felt that this year there is still a need to focus on routines and relationships. Teachers and children haven't been together, children haven't been in school, and we were having that conversation just before the break about, particularly in early years, and the disruption that people have had. We realized that some students didn't feel the same sense of belonging. They didn't see the ethos and the culture and feel part of it, because they hadn't been part of it for numbers of years or numbers of months. And so we needed to work on that. And we felt that some of the children weren't thriving in our school. And thriving, I think, is a really good word, because it has that all those sorts of meanings around not just coasting. It's about thriving, it's about doing really well, and looking at students with that in mind is perhaps a good way of thinking about it. We realized that there was a literacy gap. We realized that reading and reading for pleasure and reading generally had dropped while children weren't in school so regularly, and so literacy was something that we wanted to focus on. And that also there was the data was telling us that there was a widening gap between advantage and disadvantage. And when we went through these 4, the approaches try to address some of those, and you'll probably be able to see them, and I'll highlight some of them. So I'll stop talking for a minute and just let you read through these ones. These ones are to do with teaching and learning. So you can see that the first one is about curriculum and addressing that thriving agenda and also the gaps. The second one is a strong literacy focus for the same sort of reasons that I think that Leighton was talking about earlier. Number 3, this idea of shared routines in lessons, so that students going from different classrooms was having some sort of similar diet or similar experience in each classroom, and so trying to build up some routines there, and then also looking at our behaviour policy and looking to improve those relationships that had suffered over the time when we weren't in school. And then looking at targeting some academic support. We thought we would put in a new pastoral. We've increased the pastoral team to do that kind of scaffolding that we saw in the Dixon's report, trying to prepare children so that we're not setting them up to fail. Some added SEN support in there. We struggled with external tutors, and so we're trying to do some school-led tuition. Some of us are mentoring individuals that have been identified, but doing it internally without getting external people in. We're looking at some cognitive behaviour therapy, and then some more individual needs. And then finally, the wider strategies. I'll let you just have a read through those. And so you can see again, we've got some ideas around that idea of thriving, the idea about trying to close the gap, and the routines, getting children back into some routines within school. Okay, so you know, I don't know how many of you had a chance to do the gap tasks. One of them was that summary document of your tiered approach. If you haven't filled that in, you might remember aspects of your tiered approach document. I'm going to just pause the recording. Okay, welcome back. And can I just thank all the groups for the quality of the conversations that I've in this session and the previous breakout session. It looked like there were some really good conversations that are going on in there. So in our face-to-face in our face-to-face sessions, what we like to do at various points is to give you the opportunity to think about, right, well, what do I need to do now? So we've had a think about culture, we've had to think about what that might be like in our school. You had a chance to reflect on the case studies, and I know that raised some questions for some of you, and you collected that on the Jamboard. You've then seen a couple of examples of the tiered approaches. You've had conversations. I know that there were some really good conversations about metacognition in one of the groups that I was in. Somebody else was getting down to the real nitty-gritty about funding. I'm going to stop talking for about 2 or 3 minutes now, just to give you as individuals the opportunity just to start that to-do list. Who are the people that you're going to need to see after this session? What do you need to share? Who do you need to contact? What do you need to do? And then we'll have another about 10 or 15 minutes at the most just to finish off the session today. If you want to ask questions, then please feel free in this time, or put it into the chat or whatever. But I'm gonna stop talking now unless you ask me a question. Okay. So you've had a chance to plan or to think about your tiered approach. You've listened to some other tiered approaches. You've listened to our tiered approach. You've seen the exemplars. Just a few things just to think about. So these are bullets that you perhaps need to dodge. So the first one is that none of these are exemplars. None of these are perfect. None of these are things that you necessarily want to go away and write into yours. Every single one of your pupil premium strategy documents will be different, and they'll have different statements in because you're all working with different children in different schools. And so, you know, that's the first bullet to dodge. The next one is you've seen, we talked about this earlier, you know, we saw the products of the culture document from Dixon's. What we haven't seen is the journey that's led up into that process. You've seen our pupil premium strategy, but we've only given you a flavour of the thinking behind where that has gone on. And again, all of those examples that I've shared with you are just a statement in time. You haven't seen the process that's gone up to it. And I know from various leadership roles that I've had in school, the thinking behind it, that talking about the culture, that talking about the strategy can be as important as the finished document. And so the process is as important as the final product. And again, this being wary of just hearing a good idea and thinking, oh, we need to do that in our school. And that, again, you know, there's lots of experience in this group today, and so I know that you know that one. And then finally, just making sure that the things that you had hoped to do, actually you now are appropriate to continue with. You know, we talked about the difficulty of not wanting to give up things and admitting that they're going wrong. And it may well be that you had thought about doing some things. I am only on the periphery of leadership team here at Notre Dame, and prior to that I've had roles as a deputy heads and assistant head teachers, and it's one of the things that I realised over my years in senior leadership, that I didn't stop departments or stop people doing things, and being quite strict about stopping them. And we tend to start them and want to keep going there, and we might even then retrofit them into our pupil premium policy. But we need to be very lean. I think it was Leighton, when he was talking earlier on, was this danger of intervention overload. We don't want to write interventions into our strategy just because we're doing them because we think it looks better if we've got more of them in there. Could be better for us to have fewer that we're really focusing on, and actually stop doing some things to think about teacher workload and things like that. So as I talked about, there is this new EFF guide to the pupil premium that came out in 2021. And the reason that I put the covers on these things is so that you realise that you've got the right ones. I have a box full of these sitting in a cupboard downstairs, and I would love to send some of these out to you, so that if you feel that you want to do some work with a team of staff in school or with your leadership teams or whatever, then, and you would like multiple copies of these, they are available to download, and I can put some of the links into the chat in a minute. But you know, if you want actually paper copies to put in front of people, then please be in touch and we can sort about how we can get those to you. Another document that is worth looking at came out last year, and I still think this is worth referring to. It was more about coming out of a period of partial lockdown and that kind of recovery period. But there's still lots of good things to think about when it comes to this issue of of this tiered approach and planning for pupil premium. So we've sort of like come to the end of the thinking in terms of module 4. We've, over the last few modules, we've got you to start thinking about the data that you might need so that you can start to identify the challenge. We've talked about those things which are symptoms and the things which are causes, and we're now wanting to move on now to this section where we're systematically exploring different practices that you might want to implement. you've had a conversation with the peers in the room about what they're doing and what other schools are doing, and now it's trying to see whether they're going to be right for your particular school. The next slide I've borrowed from Mark Rowlands, and I understand that you may well be doing some work with him in Rotherham. Mark is inspirational when it comes to working with disadvantaged students, and he uses this slide, and I hope you forgive me if he repeats this when he comes to talk to you, because it demonstrates the very interrelated process that we're looking at. There are lots of things that we can do that can have an effect on this on disadvantaged children. And Leighton earlier was talking about the difficulty of knowing what to do first, because sometimes children can have multiple needs. And that again this slide highlights all the various different strategies and approaches that you can be using. And so in module 5, and you've got quite a long time to do it, as we said earlier, there's about 2 months of this, there's the opportunity to think through lots of the options and looking at the research evidence for them. And what we would like you to do is to focus on the guidance reports on the EEF website. Now, we've put up the links before. I can put up the links again towards the end of the session, but on the slide you'll find here, and these are the ones that we these guidance reports that we suspect are going to be of interest to you. So that there's all the early years literacy and literacy focus for Key Stage 2. There's one on working with children with special educational needs. There's a good conversation going on about metacognitive self-regulation. The social and emotional learning one is really good for Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. And so that, again, that's something that we know that children struggled with after lockdown. Many of us became very good at working with our parents, but there's one on parental engagement and making sure that we don't lose that. Now that we've got parents talking to us, can we keep that going and sustaining that? Behaviour for learning is there as well. Then there are some ones about maths and cognition and memory, and then also for those of who you may have identified in secondary schools that science might be an issue, and then also some thinking about the whole area of targeted support. So I'm just going to stop the share, and the link on that slide takes you to, let me find it. Not that one, just bear with me, that one. And what I've done, I hope, yes, there it is. Can you see a slide that is off YouTube that has a whole load of examples? Can somebody put a thumbs up to say that you can see that?
We can.
Yeah, great. Okay, so this is our partner research school, Huntington in York. They've done the heavy lifting on here in that they have created a whole series of training videos. You can see they're about an hour long in many cases, but you can stop them and come back to them and things like this. And this is their evidence bank. And this is exploring the evidence around all those guidance reports that I suggested a minute ago. And so you can see there's literacy, it's metacognition, SEND, memory, etc., all the ones we talked about. And the idea is that over the next 6 or 8 weeks before we come back for module 6, that you've had a chance to look through some of these and start to be thinking what is going to be the evidence-informed strategies that you are going to use. Now, you may well have some of these already. These will be things that you might want to work with your staff, just so that you understand the real active ingredients behind some of the changes that you may already have identified. We'll talk about this later on in terms of implementation in that implementation cycle. But one of the things we know about is that unless teachers understand the real active ingredients behind why these strategies work, you end up, if you're not careful, with either a superficial engagement where they look like they are doing the intervention, or you end up with the intervention changing ever so slightly to fit your particular context. And if you end up with enough of these little changes, then Dylan William comes up with this great phrase of you get these lethal mutations, things that have happened in the practice that means that its effectiveness is not as is lost, and it's not as effective as it could be. So those are there. I will put the link to this into the chat, and it's available on the slides, and we'll make sure that the slides go into the Padlet so that they're available for you to get at any one time. There will be a recording of this session, but obviously it misses out the chat and conversation that you've had in the breakout rooms. I'll stop the share and go to my slides. Okay, so as I said earlier, the next module is on Thursday the 28th. And if you are part of the 10 schools that have signed up for the enhanced programme, then you will receive some dates about when the visits are going to be during the summer term. And this is our opportunity, or your opportunity, for us to explore what's going on in your school. It's always, I've done a couple of these, and it's always a great honour to be invited into people's schools to see what's going on. And they're always really interesting and worthwhile experiences. Some of you in this meeting may well be looking to shadow those programme visits. And so for you, this is just a heads up that there is an extra training session on the 23rd of March, again between 3 and 5 p.m. And I'm very hopeful that that will be John as well as myself. And then thank you once again for your participation this afternoon. I will stay online if there are questions. If you have already identified that there are guidance reports or that pupil premium documents and you would like multiple copies of it, then if you can stay on the line and we can perhaps organise that. Otherwise, have a very good evening, and you know where we are if you want to contact us, or you can contact us through Pam, and have a good evening. And I shall see you all in April, I hope, and some of you later on in March.
Oh, that's great. Thanks.